When my daughter told me that she had already booked a room for me in a nursing home, I thought she was joking. I laughed softly, waiting for her to smile back, but she didn't. She stood in my living room with her arms crossed, eyes cold, voice flat. "Mom, it's time," she said. "You can't take care of yourself anymore. It's better this way." My name is Margaret Evans, and I'm 58 years old. For most of my life, I've been known as the woman who could handle anything. A retired schoolteacher, a widow, and a mother who raised her daughter alone after my husband passed away. I spent decades giving, loving, sacrificing every dream I ever had just to make sure my only child, Claire, could have a better life than mine. And now, that same daughter was sending me away like I was some burden she had grown tired of carrying. I remember staring at her face, searching for a sign of guilt, a flicker of the little girl who used to hold my hand so tightly on her first day of school. But there was nothing. Only coldness. Only impatience. "I already talked to the manager," she continued. "It's a good place. You'll have your own room, nurses to help you, everything you need." My heart pounded so hard that I could hear it echoing in my ears. I whispered, "Claire, I'm not sick. I'm not dying. Why are you doing this?" She sighed, looking around my house, the same house I had built with her father, brick by brick. "Because you can't live here alone, Mom. This place is too much for you." Too much for me? This was the same house where I had painted her nursery walls pink, where we had celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every small victory of her life. And now she wanted to throw me out of it. But something about her tone, something didn't sound right. It wasn't concern. It was convenience. That night, after she left, I sat on the couch surrounded by silence and old memories. I looked around the room and noticed her eyes had lingered not on me, but on the old family cabinet in the corner. The same cabinet where I kept all my important documents. My husband, God rest his soul, had been a quiet man but a smart one. Before he died, he made sure we were secure. We had savings, investments, and something more, something no one else knew about, not even Claire. And as I sat there, her words replayed in my head again and again. "You can't take care of yourself anymore." But I could see through her. This wasn't about care. This was about control, about money, about greed. That night, as the house creaked and the clock ticked softly, I made myself a promise. If she wanted to send me to a nursing home, fine. I would go. But not before I made sure she learned what it truly means to lose something precious. She thought she was clever. She thought she was powerful. But she had no idea who she was dealing with, and no idea about the secret her father and I had kept hidden for over 30 years. The next morning, I looked out at the garden and smiled. Because what Claire didn't realize was that her betrayal had just set my plan in motion. And this time, I wouldn't be the quiet, forgiving mother she thought she knew. This time, I would be the storm she never saw coming. When I think back to the beginning, it feels almost impossible to believe that Claire could ever do something so cruel to me. She was my whole world once, my only child, my reason to wake up every morning, my hope when life was hard. I had Claire when I was 29. My husband, Robert, and I had been trying for years, and when she finally arrived, it was like a miracle had landed in our arms. She had his blue eyes and my smile. I still remember the first time I held her, tiny and warm against my chest, her little hand gripping my finger as if she already knew she was safe with me. We did not have much back then. Robert worked as a mechanic in a small town outside Manchester, and I taught at the local elementary school. Our house was old, but it was ours. Every corner carried a piece of our hard work, the painted kitchen walls, the wooden floors we sanded by hand, the garden we planted together each spring. We lived simply but happily. When Claire was little, she would run around the garden chasing butterflies, her laughter ringing through the air. She loved to sit by the window while I graded papers, asking endless questions about words she found in my books. She was curious, bright, and endlessly talkative. Robert used to call her his sunshine, but sunshine does not always stay forever. When Claire was 10, Robert got sick. It started as a simple cough, something we thought would pass, but it turned into something darker, lung cancer. I still remember the smell of disinfectant from the hospital halls, the sound of the oxygen machine, the tired look in his eyes as he tried to stay strong for us. He was only 42 when he died. That night, Claire cried herself to sleep in my lap, and I promised her that no matter what happened, I would never leave her, that I would be both her mother and her father. From that day forward, my life became about one thing only: her. I took extra classes at school to earn a little more. I started tutoring on weekends. Every penny I saved went toward Claire's education, her clothes, her books. I denied myself new dresses, skipped vacations, even sold my wedding jewelry once just to pay her tuition when she got into university. I told myself it was worth it. A mother's joy, after all, is seeing her child succeed. And succeed she did. Claire was ambitious, always chasing something bigger. She graduated with honors, got a job at a finance firm in London, and soon started earning more than I ever did in my 30 years of teaching. I was proud, so proud that I told everyone in the neighborhood about her promotions, her new apartment, her designer clothes. She used to visit me every few months, bringing little gifts and stories about city life. But over time, those visits grew shorter. Her calls became less frequent. When she did call, she often sounded distracted. "I'm just busy, Mom," she'd say, typing on her keyboard while I spoke. I could hear the impatience in her voice, the distance building between us. Still, I never complained. A mother does not count how often her child calls. She just waits and prays that love will always bring them back home. When I turned 65, my health began to slow down. My knees hurt, my hands trembled when I carried heavy things, but my mind was sharp. I managed everything alone: cooking, cleaning, gardening. I even volunteered at the library twice a week. I never asked Claire for help, not once. Yet, one day she arrived unannounced, her tone suddenly full of concern. "Mom, you should not be living here by yourself," she said, walking through the house as if she were inspecting it. "You could fall or get hurt." I smiled and told her I was fine, that the doctor said I was in good health. But she kept pushing. She started talking about better options, about moving somewhere safe and convenient. At first, I thought she meant a smaller home closer to her, but then she showed me a brochure for a nursing home outside the city. I laughed. "Claire, I am not ready for that. Those places are for people who cannot care for themselves." She shrugged. "Exactly, and that will be you soon. Why wait until it is too late?" Her words stung, but I brushed them off. Maybe she was just worried. Maybe she did not mean it the way it sounded. I tried to tell myself that she loved me, that she only wanted the best. But then, things started to change. She began asking questions about my house. Who owned it? Did I have insurance? What was written in the will her father and I had made years ago? I told her that everything was taken care of, but she kept pushing. Her tone changed from caring to calculating. One evening, I overheard her on the phone while she thought I was asleep. Her voice was sharp, businesslike. "Yes, once she moves out, we can sell it. The market is strong right now. I just need her to agree." My heart stopped. Sell it? My home? The only thing Robert and I built together? I felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. The next morning, I asked her directly, "Claire, are you planning to sell the house?" She hesitated, then smiled tightly. "Mom, you do not need this big place anymore. It is just sitting here. I can handle everything and invest the money for you. Invest the money for me." That was the moment I realized she no longer saw me as her mother. She saw me as a problem to solve, a property to control. Still, I stayed quiet. I wanted to believe that she might change her mind. I prayed every night that she would come to her senses, that the girl I raised would remember who she was. But instead, things got worse. A few weeks later, a man came to my door with a clipboard. He introduced himself as a representative from Silver Pine Senior Living. He said he was here to discuss my upcoming move. I stood frozen at the door. "My move?" I asked. "Yes," he said, flipping through his papers. "Your daughter, Ms. Claire Evans, made the arrangements." I felt the air leave my body. When I called Claire, she was unapologetic. "I'm just doing what is best for you, Mom," she said. "The house is too much. You will thank me later." That night, I could not sleep. I walked through every room of my house, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Everything told a story, our story. Robert's old armchair, the the piano Claire used to play, the wedding picture by the staircase. This was not just a building, this was my life. Tears filled my eyes as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small safe hidden behind my dresser. Inside it were papers no one had touched for decades, Robert's investments, bonds, and one more secret he had left for me before he died. I opened the safe and ran my fingers across the envelope with his handwriting. For Margaret, if ever needed. I had never opened it. Robert always said, "Only open it if you are in trouble." For years, I thought he meant financial trouble, but now I understood. He meant danger. As I sat there under the dim light of my bedside lamp, I felt anger rising inside me, stronger than I had ever felt before. Not the anger of a hurt mother, but the quiet fury of a woman who has finally seen the truth. Claire was not trying to protect me. She was trying to erase me. And that was the night I stopped being afraid. Because somewhere deep inside that envelope, I knew Robert had left me more than memories. He had left me power. Power that Claire did not know existed. Power that would soon teach her the hardest lesson of her life. The morning after I opened Robert's envelope, everything in my world felt different. Not because anything had changed yet on the outside, but because something inside me had shifted forever. I was no longer the quiet, obedient mother waiting for her daughter's approval. I was a woman who had finally seen the truth, and the truth was sharp enough to cut through any illusion of love that remained. The envelope contained documents I had never seen before. Stocks, certificates, and one small handwritten note from Robert. It said, "If you are reading this, Margaret, then life has tested your heart again. Remember what we built together. What is ours cannot be taken unless you give it away. Protect it. Protect yourself." Below the note was a second paper, a separate account with a balance that made my breath catch. It was money Robert had saved secretly over the years, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, enough to buy freedom. Claire had no idea it existed. For a moment, I almost smiled. My husband had always known how to plan ahead. But my peace did not last long, because later that day, the phone rang. "Mom, we need to talk," Claire said in that same firm tone. "I talked to the lawyer about transferring the property. It will make things easier once you move out." My heart clenched. "Transfer? Claire, this house is in my name, your father's name and mine," she sighed, as if I were a stubborn child. "Exactly, and that is the problem. You cannot manage all these papers anymore. I'm just trying to handle it for you." Her voice had lost its warmth completely. It was businesslike, almost rehearsed. "Claire," I said softly, "you do not need to handle anything for me. I am perfectly capable." There was silence on the other end, and then she said something that cut deep into my heart. "You know, Mom, sometimes people your age do not realize when they are no longer capable. I'm only doing this because I care about you. But if you make it hard for me, I will have to involve the authorities." Authorities. That word hung in the air like poison. Was she threatening me? My own daughter? I could not believe it. But as I listened to her speak, explaining her plan, it became clear. She wanted full control over my house, my accounts, everything. She spoke of legal guardianship, of power of attorney, and of how she could take care of everything for me if I just signed a few papers. I felt my throat tighten. "Claire," I said quietly, "do you even hear yourself?" "I'm just being practical," she replied coldly. "You should be grateful." Grateful. That word echoed in my mind long after she hung up. I had been grateful my entire life for every smile, every call, every small piece of affection she gave me. But now, all I felt was betrayal. Over the next few days, she kept calling, pressing me to sign. She even brought a lawyer to my house one afternoon without telling me. He was a young man in a gray suit, polite but firm. "Mrs. Evans," he said, "your daughter has asked me to help you transfer ownership to simplify future matters." I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Young man, future matters are mine to decide. You may leave." Claire's face turned red. "Mom, you are being ridiculous," she snapped. "Why are you making this so hard?" "Because this is my home," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "And because I do not trust you anymore." That was the first time I said it aloud. And when I did, her expression changed. The fake concern vanished, replaced by anger so sharp I could feel it in the air. "You will regret this," she hissed before storming out. I stood there for a long time after she left, the lawyer's business card still lying on the table. My hands were shaking, but inside, something strong was forming. A quiet fire that refused to die. That night, I took out Robert's papers again. I made copies of everything and stored them in different places: the library, my neighbor's house, and one in the post office safe box Robert and I had opened years ago. I did not know what would happen next, but I knew I needed to be ready. The next week, the betrayal deepened. I came home from the grocery store to find strangers walking through my garden. A real estate agent and a couple with a clipboard were inspecting the property. "Excuse me," I said sharply. "What are you doing here?" The woman smiled nervously. "We were told the house would be available soon. Claire Evans gave us permission to look around." I felt my knees weaken. Claire had listed the house without even telling me. I called her immediately. She answered cheerfully at first, then grew cold when she realized why I was calling. "Mom, calm down," she said. "I just put out a feeler. No one has made an offer yet." "A feeler? This is my home, Claire," I shouted. "You have no right." "Actually, I do," she said smugly. "You will see soon enough." And she was right, in a way. 2 days later, I received a letter from the council. It said there had been a request filed to review my ability to manage property due to declining health and age. The request had been filed by my daughter. For a moment, I could not even breathe. I sat on the porch, clutching the letter, the world spinning around me. She wanted to prove I was unfit. She wanted to take everything. Neighbors began to whisper. Some avoided me. Others looked at me with pity. I could feel my dignity slipping away piece by piece. Every night, I cried silently into my pillow, asking myself what I had done wrong as a mother to raise someone capable of this kind of cruelty. One afternoon, my friend Helen from the library came by with soup. "You look pale, Margaret," she said gently. "You must take care of yourself." I tried to smile. "It is nothing, Helen, just family matters." But she saw through me. "I have seen that girl talk to you. You do not deserve this. You have always been kind." Her words gave me a strange comfort, not because they fixed anything, but because someone else finally saw what I was going through. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, I sat by the fire and looked at Robert's picture. "You warned me, didn't you?" I whispered. "You always said love can turn into greed if you give without limits." I realized then that I had given everything to Claire, my time, my love, my sacrifices, and now she thought she owned me because of it. But I was not powerless. Over the next few days, I watched carefully. I noticed how she started showing up unexpectedly, pretending to bring groceries, but really checking drawers, opening cupboards. She asked again about important papers. Once, I caught her trying to open the safe. When I asked what she was doing, she laughed awkwardly. "Oh, just looking for the old family photos." Photos, of course. I played along. I smiled. I made tea. I acted like I believed her. Inside, however, I was watching her every move. The woman I had called my daughter was now my enemy, and she had no idea that I knew. That night, I made a decision. I called our family lawyer, Mr. Franklin, an old friend of Robert's. "Margaret," he said when he heard my voice, "it has been too long. What can I do for you?" "I need to change some documents," I said quietly, "and I need absolute confidentiality." He agreed to meet me the next morning. When I arrived at his office, he greeted me kindly, but his eyes showed concern as I explained everything. "She's trying to take control?" he asked, frowning. "Yes," I said, "and I need to make sure she cannot touch anything that belongs to me or to Robert." We spent hours going over the details. I updated my will, moved my accounts under new management, and ensured that the hidden fortune Robert had left remained completely untouchable. When it was done, Mr. Franklin looked at me and said softly, "You are doing the right thing, Margaret. Sometimes protection is the purest form of love, for yourself and even for them." I thanked him and left, the cold air outside filling my lungs like freedom. For the first time in months, I felt steady again. That evening, Claire called once more, her voice sweet, almost rehearsed. "Mom, I have been thinking," she said. "Maybe I was too harsh. How about dinner tomorrow? My treat." I smiled to myself. "Of course, dear," I said. "I would love that." She thought I was softening. She thought she still had control. But what she did not know was that my patience had turned into strategy. And soon she would learn that I was not the weak old woman she believed me to be. Because every word she spoke now, every move she made, I was recording it all. The game had just begun. The autumn air carried a sharp chill as Mary stepped out of the lawyer's office, the folder clutched tightly in her hands. The streets were quiet, just the faint sound of leaves scraping along the pavement. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from something stronger, a surge of purpose that had been missing for far too long. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The truth about the forged will had changed everything. What was once a silent ache had become a clear mission. Mary had spent her entire life believing in the goodness of family. She had given her son everything, her home, her trust, her name, and when her daughter-in-law came along, she extended that same kindness, welcoming her as if she were her own child. But kindness had been her weakness. She saw that now. Every meal she cooked, every gift she offered, every kind word had been used as currency to buy her silence while they plotted behind her back. When Mary's husband Thomas passed away, she had been devastated. His steady voice had guided her through life's storms. He had always managed their finances, their property, even their wills. She remembered his promise clearly, said on a summer evening years ago as the sun dipped behind their apple trees. "If anything ever happens to me, Mary, you will never be left with nothing. I've made sure of that." But now, standing in front of the courthouse, she realized how deeply that promise had been betrayed. Her own son and his wife had rewritten the future Thomas had built for her. They had forged her will and moved assets to their own names while she was struggling with early signs of dementia. And they had almost succeeded. Almost. It was the word almost that now fueled her every breath. Inside her folder were copies of the hidden camera footage. The night she had installed those cameras, she had trembled with guilt. She had felt as if she were betraying her own family. But when she saw the footage, the cruel laughter, the whispering over her bank documents, the moment her daughter-in-law practiced her signature, something in her had snapped. That night had marked the end of the old Mary. The next morning, she sat quietly at her kitchen table with her coffee growing cold as she planned. She didn't call the police immediately. Instead, she began to collect everything: bank records, medical notes, and statements from the few friends who had noticed the strange behavior of her son and his wife. She even visited the local notary, pretending to be confused to confirm the date of the forged documents. It took months, and every step tested her patience and strength. But beneath her calm exterior, Mary was a storm waiting to break. The turning point truly began when her old friend Helen came by one afternoon. Helen had always been a sharp woman, practical and loyal. When Mary showed her the footage, Helen simply said, "You know what this means, right? You are not the victim anymore. You have the power now." Those words struck her deeply. Power. She had never thought of herself as powerful. But power was not about cruelty. It was about control, about finally reclaiming her life from those who had stolen it piece by piece. From that day forward, Mary stopped being cautious. She met with a new lawyer, a young, determined woman named Clara who specialized in elder fraud cases. Together, they rebuilt the truth from the ground up. Clara taught her how to remain calm during questioning, how to document every conversation, how to respond when her son inevitably tried to guilt her into dropping the case. Mary's transformation was slow but deliberate. She began to wear her hair differently, her posture straighter. She even joined a local support group for seniors who had faced family financial abuse. Listening to their stories only strengthened her resolve. She realized this wasn't just about her jewelry or her will, it was about dignity, about showing others that even at 64, she was far from helpless. Weeks later, when her son and daughter-in-law arrived at her house unexpectedly, pretending to check in, Mary was ready. They brought flowers and forced smiles. Her daughter-in-law hugged her with that same sweet poisoned voice she always used. "We just wanted to see how you were doing, Mom," she said. Mary smiled softly, inviting them inside. The living room was spotless with the tea already set. She had learned that revenge didn't always need to look angry. It could be patient, polite, almost gentle. As they sat, Mary mentioned casually, "I've been busy lately. Spoke to Clara again this morning." Her son's smile froze. His wife's hand tightened around the cup. "Clara?" he asked, his voice careful. "Yes," Mary replied calmly. "My new lawyer. She's helping me reorganize my finances. You know, after all the confusion that's been happening." The silence that followed was heavy, almost theatrical. Her daughter-in-law's face turned pale. Mary didn't need to raise her voice. Her tone carried all the weight of what they both knew. That night, Mary sat by her window, watching their car disappear down the road. Her heart was pounding again, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from triumph. Over the next few weeks, she continued to act as though everything was normal. She even visited her son's house for dinner, smiling through their forced pleasantries, all the while knowing the evidence she had was more than enough to expose them. Clara advised patience. "Let them believe they're safe. The court will see everything when the time is right." Then came the day of confrontation. Mary received a call from her son, his voice trembling with anger. "Mom, how could you do this? You're ruining our lives." She replied softly, "You already ruined mine. I'm just taking it back." For the first time, he had no words. That single conversation was the emotional center of her turning point. She no longer saw him as her little boy. She saw him as a man who had made his choice. The sadness remained, yes, but it no longer controlled her. In the courtroom weeks later, as the judge reviewed the footage, Mary sat still. Her hands didn't shake. She listened as her daughter-in-law's voice filled the room from the recording. "I want all of her jewelry. After all, it will be mine someday." The words that had once shattered her now empowered her. The courtroom gasped when the video showed her daughter-in-law practicing Mary's signature. And when the judge turned to her and asked, "Mrs. Walker, did you authorize these documents?" She answered firmly, "No, Your Honor. I may have forgotten many things these past years, but I never forgot my own name." A murmur spread through the court. Her son lowered his head. His wife buried her face in her hands. In that moment, Mary wasn't just a victim seeking justice. She was the storm reclaiming her calm. When the session ended, Clara turned to her and said, "You did it." Mary smiled faintly. "No," she whispered. "I'm just getting started." That night, she returned home to the same house where it had all begun. The air felt lighter. The shadows no longer frightened her. She poured herself a cup of tea and looked at her reflection in the window. For the first time, she saw not an old woman, but a survivor, a woman who had walked through betrayal and come out stronger. The turning point wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about rebirth. The quiet, dependable woman the town once knew was gone. In her place stood someone unshakable, someone who had learned that revenge wasn't about anger. It was about justice, patience, and the satisfaction of watching deceit unravel under its own weight. Mary finally allowed herself to smile. The war was not over yet, but the victory had already begun in her heart. After the court hearing, when the judge had seen the footage and my name began to whisper through the town with a new kind of respect, I felt something settle in my bones. The worst of the shock was over. The rage had been useful, but now I needed precision. Revenge without plan is merely anger. I wanted something cleaner than mere anger. I wanted justice that would last. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder Mr. Franklin had helped me prepare. The papers rustled like old leaves. There were bank statements, notarized affidavits, transcripts from the support group, the printed timestamps from the hidden cameras, and the statements from neighbors who had seen my daughter and son in conversations that smelled of calculations rather than concern. Each page was a stone in the wall I was building around my security. Clara, my lawyer, had a calm way of turning that stack of emotion into strategy. We met twice a week in her office, a tidy place with light that made everything look honest. She taught me how to think like someone who could win without hatred. She taught me how to convert proof into legal actions that would be airtight. She insisted on one rule: do everything above board. Do not give them an inch to claim manipulation. First step, she said, was to secure the assets. My husband had left instructions for emergency access, but it had been me who had to act. We moved the accounts into a trust with a reputable trustee I trusted implicitly. It was not secretive, it was protection. I signed papers that placed the management of our savings into hands that could not be influenced by emotional blackmail. I felt the weight lift when the bank manager confirmed the transfer. That weight was not only monetary, it was the knowledge that the thing they wanted most could no longer be ripped away by a signature hurried in a greedy moment. Next, I created a paper trail that would shame them in the light of truth. Every call that my daughter made insisting I sign, every visit she staged with a fake concern, every attempt to open drawers was recorded and documented. I'd stopped pretending ignorance. I started answering with questions into my phone, with calm requests that they repeat themselves in the presence of witnesses. When she brought her young lawyer again, I insisted that Mr. Franklin be present. When they objected, I smiled and said very calmly that I was learning to protect myself. They left, flustered like children caught in a lie. Clara and I filed for a temporary injunction to prevent any sale of the house. It was a legal hammer that barred transfers until the court could decide whether my daughter had done what the recording suggested. That alone froze the plan they had so carefully put in motion. The listing vanished quietly from the agent's website. The couple who had come to see the property got one polite email from the agent about a legal hold. They moved on. I drank tea and watched the autumn light cross the garden and understood that sometimes victory comes in small silences. We did not stop at injunctions. I wanted accountability. We filed a civil suit for attempted fraud and elder abuse. The suit was not just about money, it was about principle. I wanted the town to read the filings if they wished, to see the cold words transformed into legal truth. When the paper announcing the hearing arrived in the local paper, my hands trembled, but not with fear. It was a new kind of adrenaline. This was the moment I used to fear. Now I faced it with preparation. I also realized I needed to protect myself medically. My daughter had hinted about frailty and used my age as a weapon. I insisted on a complete medical evaluation and shared it with Clara. The tests showed that my memory was intact and my physical condition was manageable with ordinary care. It was a small victory, but an important one. When community members expressed worry about me, I could show them the results, and their pity turned into admiration. That was tactical. They began to see that contrary to the narrative she had woven, I was clear and capable. But legal walls alone do not deter people who live for quick wealth. They needed humiliation that cut where they hurt most. I did not want revenge that destroyed lives. I wanted consequences that taught truth. So I worked with Clara to draft letters to the professional bodies where my daughter worked and where her partner did business. The letters were formal, factual, and void of any venom. They detailed the investigation that was ongoing, the court filings, and the documents that suggested unethical behavior. The result was immediate. A compliance officer from her firm called her in for a meeting. I did not know the details, and I did not care. I only wanted the system to respond. I also went to the local community council and told them what had been happening. It was one of the hardest things to do. Exposing my own family to the public felt like ripping open a wound. But the council chair listened and arranged a small meeting with neighbors. I read a statement about dignity and trust and about how easy it can be for love to be weaponized. People sat up straight. The whispers stopped. I felt the community shift its gaze, and that was important. Shame is a heavy thing, but when carried by truth, it can mend wrongs, not only punish. There were practical moves too. I changed the locks and scheduled new security checks around the house. I moved copies of the most important documents into safety deposit boxes in different towns. I deposited copies with Mr. Franklin as well as with a trust company. I opened a private mailbox where important letters would be sent. Boring steps perhaps, but necessary. Small acts of foresight that built an invisible fortress. My favorite plan required patience. I staged dinners at my house, inviting those friends and neighbors I trusted. I cooked, I laughed, I served the same biscuits Claire had loved as a child. I knew she watched these small gatherings with a hunger she could not hide. She would walk past my window and look in, searching for signs of weakness. Instead, she found me, upright and surrounded by people who knew the truth. Those social dinners were not public displays. They were a way to reinstall my life where it belonged, but the most delicate part of the plan was the one that felt like artifice. I let my daughter think she had me under control. I let her see the trust documents already in place, but I pretended confusion when it suited me. I answered her calls slowly and with apparent weakness when she visited, making her slip into that false ease that comes when the predator believes the prey is tamed. She smiled with relief at times. It made me sick, but I learned to turn my revulsion into a tool. If she believed she had beaten me, she would stop guarding her own moves. People are careless when they think they have won. I also took the step of bringing in a private investigator. Some might think that is dishonorable. I think of it as a mirror. The investigator told me things I already suspected, and some I had not imagined. He documented the phone calls the moment my daughter tried to coerce a signature. He found a bank transfer that had been attempted, a small fee moved in the middle of the night, a signature practice in a cafe photographed by a barista who agreed to testify. The investigator's reports added color to the skeleton of my case. They were concrete and irrefutable. Every night I cataloged the day's progress in a small leather notebook. It felt like making a map. I wrote down dates, names, actions, and my reactions. I wrote difficult things. I allowed myself to feel the hurt, and then I closed the book and turned it into steps. There was no catharsis in endless grief for me anymore. There was channeling. Grief became fuel. One of the hardest moves I made was to confront my own emotions about my son. He had been complicit in this plan, in ways that made my heart fracture. I called him to my home one evening and asked him to sit. I did not yell. I did not cry. I told him exactly what I felt, each sentence measured. He tried to explain. He spoke of pressure and fear and of opportunities he could not pass up. He stared at his hands like a man who had forgotten how to be a son. I listened, and then I said, very quietly, that I still loved him, but that love could never mean surrendering my dignity. He left in silence. That moment did something strange to both of us. He knew now that I knew. He muttered apologies later, but apologies without action are hollow. I had prepared for that. I wanted him to feel the consequences of his choice without being destroyed. I wanted him to remember the woman who raised him once he had his quiet time, to be honest. There were tactical interactions with the press as well. Clara advised caution. She said careful words to a local reporter who had been kind to my family years ago. The piece that appeared was not sensational. It was an honest recounting of the facts that had already been filed in court. It did not scream scandal, but it made the record public in a way that encouraged institutions to act. That was what I wanted, not revenge that destroyed, a consequence that required reparation. Throughout this planning phase, I learned an important truth. Revenge is not always about spectacle. It is about the slow, steady removal of the advantages someone used to harm you. It is about rewriting a story so future chapters do not repeat the same cruelty. It felt strange to say it out loud, but my plan was not about making them suffer. It was about removing their ability to take advantage of others again. My days were filled with small victories and small fears. I would walk in the garden, breathe in the lavender, and remind myself of the cost of quiet living. I reminded myself of Robert, who had taught me the value of planning. I thought of his hands when he tightened bolts in his garage, his steady voice telling me that the small things were what kept life from falling apart. When the court date drew near, I felt a curious calm. The months of planning had not made me immune to anxiety. I still worried. I worried for the humiliation that might come to family members and how the town would judge me for bringing them into the light. But I also knew that if I backed down, the cruelty would continue, unchecked. The choice was simple in its moral clarity. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed in a modest suit, not to impress, but to show I was serious. Clara met me at the courthouse and squeezed my hand. She whispered, "You have done everything carefully. We will see the truth." I walked into the courtroom with the leather notebook under my arm and the stack of documents in a neat folder. When the bailiff called my name, I felt a strange sense of coming home to a place I had built with patience and care. The plan had not been violent. It had not been melodramatic. It was patient, legal, and moral. It relied on proof, on witnesses, and on institutions that would respond when presented with the truth. That was my kind of revenge. A slow rebuilding until the foundation they had tried to gut was strong once more. As the hearing began and the prosecutor displayed the evidence, I sat calm. Had expected anger to rise within, but all I felt was focus. My plan was working not because it ruined lives, but because it repaired mine. When the judge rendered his decision the following week, he ordered restrictions on any transfer of assets until full investigation. He admonished the daughter in a manner that was gentle and public. It was not the moment of theatrical humiliation I had imagined in idle dreams, but it was more powerful in its reality. The court had seen what I had collected, and they had acted to stop further harm. My revenge plan had reached its first victory, and yet I knew this was only the middle of the story. There would be more legal filings, more hearings, and perhaps more awkward family encounters. But the engine had been set in motion. The people who thought greed could be hidden by affection now had to contend with a woman who had learned how to guard her life with intelligence and patience. That night I sat at the table again and opened my leather notebook. I wrote 3 words across the page in slow, careful letters: protect, rebuild, forgive. Forgive did not mean forget. Forgive meant I would no longer be ruled by bitterness. I would rebuild my life piece by piece and protect others by testifying if needed. That was the truest revenge of all, living fully on my own terms. Outside, in the dark, the house seemed to breathe with me. The plan had worked because it was righteous and because it was steady. I poured a cup of tea and watched the moon rise over the garden where Claire had once chased butterflies. I allowed myself a small, private smile. They had underestimated me. They had thought age meant weakness. I had proved instead that it could mean wisdom, patience, and the power to set a course that honored a lifetime of love while refusing to be consumed by its shadows. Tomorrow would bring the next phase. For now I would sleep, and in my dreams I would not be a victim. I would be a woman who had learned to stand again. The morning of the final hearing arrived like the calm before a storm. The sky above Brighton Court was an endless gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I stood at the courthouse steps, my hands gripping the handle of my leather notebook, the same one that had guided me through every stage of my plan. My reflection in the glass doors looked different now. There were lines of age, yes, but behind them lived strength. I was no longer a frightened mother. I was a woman prepared to face the ones who had betrayed her. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with whispers. Reporters sat in the back rows, notebooks ready. My daughter Claire sat at the defense table with her partner, both dressed sharply, their expressions carved into masks of polite concern. When her eyes met mine, a flicker of something passed through her face. It was not guilt exactly. It was surprise, the realization that I had not come to crumble, but to fight. The judge entered. The room rose, then settled into silence. The clerk read the charges of attempted fraud and elder coercion. Hearing those words aloud was like watching my pain take physical shape. Clara sat beside me, calm as always, her hand a steady anchor on the table. She whispered, "You have done everything right. Let the truth speak." The prosecutor began with the footage from my living room. On the screen, the audience saw me seated in my chair, frail and soft-spoken, while Claire's voice filled the room with false sweetness. "Mom, just sign the form. It will make everything easier," she said in the recording. The video captured the moment she tried to guide my hand to the paper. The gasps in the courtroom were audible. Claire shifted in her seat, her lawyer objected, but the judge raised his hand for silence. Then came the second clip. The camera from the hallway showed her partner whispering to her, "Once she signs, we can list the property immediately." His words were clear and damning. The same people who had painted me as confused now sat trapped by their own confidence. When the videos ended, the judge leaned forward. His voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Evans, do you confirm that this footage was taken in your home and under your knowledge?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. It was my only way to prove that I was not losing my mind. Then it was my turn to speak. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. For years, I began, I believed that love and trust were enough to keep a family together. I was wrong. I learned that love without respect becomes a tool for manipulation. My daughter thought age made me weak. She forgot that experience is its own form of strength. I am not here to destroy her. I am here to reclaim my dignity. The courtroom remained silent. Even the judge looked moved. Clara placed a hand on my arm, signaling that my words had struck deep. When Claire's lawyer stood to defend her, his words felt hollow. He spoke about misunderstandings, about concern for my well-being, about how families make mistakes. But the evidence was too clear. Every photograph, every bank statement, every transcript spoke louder than his rehearsed empathy. Then something unexpected happened. My son, who had been sitting quietly behind them, stood up. His voice trembled, but his words were sharp. "Your Honor, I want to tell the truth," he said. "Mom is right. Claire wanted to move her into a nursing home so we could sell the house. I was part of the plan, but I could not go through with it. She deserves peace, not lies." Claire turned on him with a look that could cut glass. "You traitor," she hissed under her breath, but it was too late. The damage was done. The courtroom filled with whispers again, like a tide rolling through the benches. The judge raised his gavel once more. "Enough," he said. He looked at Claire, then at her lawyer. "The evidence of manipulation is undeniable. The court finds grounds to protect Mrs. Evans's assets and declares full independence to her estate. Furthermore, restitution must be made for emotional and financial harm." The sound of the gavel striking the wood echoed through the room. It was only one word, but it carried the weight of justice. "Granted." Claire's face lost all color. Her partner lowered his head, his career now tethered to a public scandal. The silence that followed was not relief exactly. It was the sound of years of pain dissolving into something new. Freedom. When the session ended, I gathered my papers. My legs shook slightly as I walked toward the exit, but my heart was steady. Outside, the rain had begun to fall softly. Reporters called my name, asking for statements, but I only said, "The truth always finds its way." Then I walked down the steps with Clara by my side. As we reached the car, I looked up at the gray sky. The rain felt clean on my skin. It washed away the bitterness that had clung to me for months. Clara smiled and said quietly, "Justice does not always roar, Margaret. Sometimes it whispers." That evening I returned home to my garden. The birds still came for crumbs of bread, just as they had the morning my daughter first told me I would be sent away. But the garden looked different now. It was mine again, untouched by greed or deceit. I stood there under the drizzle, breathing in the scent of wet earth. I heard the gate open. My son stood there, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. His eyes were red, but his voice was honest. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said. I nodded slowly. "I know," I replied. "You made it right when it mattered." We sat together in silence, watching the rain soften into mist. For the first time in a long while, the world felt balanced again. I had fought not with anger, but with truth. My revenge had never been about destruction. It was about restoration. As darkness settled, I whispered to the air, "Robert, you would be proud." The wind rustled through the garden as if to answer. The storm had passed, justice had spoken, and I was finally free. The night after the storm of confrontation, Mary sat in her living room surrounded by silence. The ticking of the clock echoed softly, each second reminding her that peace had finally returned. The air felt lighter. For months, her home had carried the weight of suspicion, betrayal, and fear. But now, the shadows had lifted. The jewelry box that once symbolized her pain sat on the table in front of her, open, gleaming in the faint golden light. Each piece of jewelry told a story of love, loyalty, and legacy. Once, she had thought she might never see it again, but now every ring and necklace seemed to breathe again, restored to its rightful place. Mary smiled faintly as she traced her fingers over the sapphire brooch her late husband had given her on their 10th anniversary. "You'd be proud of me, Robert," she whispered softly. I finally stood my ground. The legal battle that followed the confrontation had been grueling, but it had worked in her favor. The hidden footage, the one that caught Olivia trying to open her safe and forging documents, was undeniable evidence. The judge's words still rang in Mary's memory, clear and powerful. This court finds the defendant guilty of attempted fraud and elder abuse. Full restitution of property and assets is granted to Mary Thompson. When those words were spoken, Mary had felt years of tension melt away. The weight that had crushed her chest for so long had finally been lifted. She had fought and won. But what surprised her most wasn't the victory. It was the calm she felt afterward. She didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. Instead, she felt free. Free from manipulation, from fear, from pretending to be small so others could feel big. A soft knock came at the door. Mary turned and smiled gently when she saw Lily, her granddaughter. Lily, now 17, had stood by her through it all. When the truth about her mother, Olivia, came out, Lily had chosen to live with her grandmother. "Grandma," Lily asked softly, stepping inside, "I made you some tea." Mary's heart warmed. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've grown so much through all this." Lily sat beside her, handing her the cup. "I learned from the best," she said, smiling shyly. "You didn't give up, even when everyone told you to let it go." Mary looked into her granddaughter's eyes and saw something she hadn't seen in her family for years: genuine love and respect. The kind that wasn't built on greed or inheritance, but on shared strength and honesty. "You know," Mary said thoughtfully, "I once thought revenge was about hurting the person who hurt you. But now I understand. True revenge is living well. It's reclaiming your peace, your dignity, and your life." Lily nodded slowly. "And you did that, Grandma." Mary chuckled softly. "We both did." The next morning, Mary visited the community garden she had helped establish years ago. She hadn't been there in months, but as soon as she walked in, the smell of fresh soil and blooming flowers embraced her like an old friend. Neighbors greeted her warmly, people who had read about her story in the local paper and admired her courage. She smiled and waved, feeling the world shift from darkness to light once again. It wasn't fame she sought, only the quiet comfort of knowing she had not been broken. Later that week, she met with her lawyer to finalize a decision she had been thinking about for weeks. "I want to create a trust," she said firmly, "for Lily. Not just for money, but for education, for her future. I want her to learn what it means to build something, not take it." The lawyer smiled. "That's a wise choice, Mrs. Thompson," Mary nodded. "We must protect what truly matters." When she returned home that evening, the sun was setting, casting a soft orange hue across her living room. The jewelry box still sat on the table, but now it was different. No longer a symbol of greed or power, it was simply a reminder of endurance. Mary picked up the brooch again and pinned it gently to her sweater. She caught her reflection in the mirror and smiled. She looked older, yes, but stronger too, a woman who had faced deceit and walked away with grace. She turned to the window and watched Lily laughing outside with friends. Her laughter was bright, full of life, the sound of a future untainted by bitterness. For the first time in years, Mary allowed herself to dream again, not about wealth or revenge, but about peace, the kind that comes from knowing you survived, you fought, and you won without losing yourself. A few weeks later, Mary received a letter in the mail. It was from Olivia, her estranged daughter-in-law, written from the rehabilitation center where she had been ordered to stay as part of her sentence. The letter was brief. It spoke of regret, shame, and a wish for forgiveness. Mary read it in silence, her emotions mixed. There was a time when she would have torn such a letter apart, but now she simply placed it back in its envelope and set it beside her teacup. She whispered quietly, "Forgiveness is not for you, Olivia. It's for me." And with that, she felt the last remnants of pain dissolve. As night fell, Mary sat by the window with a book in her hand. The house was peaceful again, filled not with the ghosts of betrayal, but with the quiet hum of life returning to normal. Before turning off the light, she looked around the room one last time and whispered, "It's over." And for the first time in a long time, she truly meant it. She went to bed, not as the victim of a cruel betrayal, but as a survivor, a woman who had turned her pain into power and her silence into strength. The jewelry, the house, even the courtroom victory, none of it mattered as much as the lesson she had learned. True revenge is not destruction. It is peace. When dawn broke, Sunlight filtered through the curtains, warming her face. Mary smiled in her sleep, dreaming not of the past, but of the bright, beautiful future that awaited her and Lily, one filled with honesty, hope, and freedom. And so, the woman who once lost everything found something far greater herself. Months had passed since the courtroom victory, and Mary's life had slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm. Autumn had arrived, painting the town in shades of gold and amber. The chill in the morning air felt refreshing, a reminder that even after the harshest seasons, warmth always returns. Lily was now preparing for college, and Mary had spent the week helping her pack. Their bond had grown stronger with every shared laugh and late-night conversation. The house that once echoed with tension now felt alive again, filled with hope and quiet joy. One Saturday evening, they decided to host a small dinner, not a celebration, but a gathering of the Ebom, people who had stood by them during their darkest days. The lawyer, a few close neighbors, and even the police officer who had handled the case came. The table was beautifully set, candles flickering gently as laughter filled the room. Mary stood for a moment, just observing. The sound of joy was something she had not heard in her home for a long time. Her heart swelled with gratitude. She realized this, right here, was what she had fought for. Not jewelry, not money, but peace and belonging. After dinner, as everyone shared stories, Lily raised her glass. "To Grandma," she said proudly, "for teaching me that strength isn't about revenge, it's about standing up for yourself with grace." The room grew quiet for a moment, and all eyes turned to Mary. She smiled, her eyes glistening softly in the candlelight. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said warmly. "But remember, we don't go through pain to become bitter. We go through it to become wiser. Life will always test us. What matters is how we respond." Her words settled deeply into everyone's hearts. It wasn't a speech of victory, but of wisdom, the kind that only comes from surviving something that tried to destroy you. Later that night, after everyone had left, Mary and Lily stood outside under the starlit sky. The moon was bright, casting a silver glow over the garden. "Grandma," Lily said softly, "do you ever think about her, about Mom?" Mary sighed, looking up at the stars. "Sometimes, but not with anger anymore. I think about what went wrong, and I pray she finds peace, just like we did." Lily nodded quietly. "I hope one day she does too." Mary placed her arm around her granddaughter. "We can't control others, my dear, but we can choose to live without hate." They stood there in silence for a long moment, the cool breeze brushing against their faces. It was a silence filled not with pain, but with understanding, the kind that heals. Before going inside, Mary turned to look at the house one last time. The warm light spilling from the windows reminded her how far she had come. She smiled to herself, whispering, "This is my new beginning." That night, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, her favorite brooch pinned to her sweater. The reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, once broken, now whole. She thought about the past, but only for a moment. Then she smiled and whispered, "It's time to live again." As the clock struck midnight, Mary closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her old life finally fade away. What remained was strength, peace, and the quiet joy of knowing she had rewritten her own story. And so, the woman who once lost everything ended not in bitterness, but in peace, surrounded by love, healed by truth, and forever remembered as the woman who refused to be defeated.